For far too long, many black nations continuously ranked embarrassingly low on the scale. But fortunately, no one country, no one people regardless of color was divinely created to remain prey or predator by default. Fortunately, it's still not late for black people to start growing some teeth, to start growing some claws, to stop being prey. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. So today we'll continue with my series titled Black versus White, and in my previous video we were able to stress the fact that slavery transcends religion, but that more importantly slavery transcends color. We were also able to expose the fact that even though we claim to be higher animals, humans in general regardless of color still operate under the old ancient law of prey versus predator, where the predator always seems eager to subdue, exploit and enslave the prey. But more importantly, I was able to briefly introduce something I call MMM, or simply put the scale. And this is very important because the scale is what separates a predator from a prey. And the way it works is very simple. You rank very high on the scale and you are definitely a predator. But if you rank low like most black African countries, then you are a perfect prey. It's actually that simple. Today on the scale, we'll begin with military as the very first M on the scale, because unlike media and money, which are the other M's on the scale, military is a very good example of hard power, which is tangible enough for us to see, measure and quantify, unlike let's say media for example, which is a good example of soft power, but it can sometimes be difficult for us to see, quantify or measure. So let's begin by quickly defining the word military. Simply put, military basically means the organized armed forces of a country, which is primarily responsible for defending the country against external or internal threats. It is also responsible for supporting the country's national interest anywhere in the world. And a good example of supporting national interest is the United States assisting the Ukrainian military against Russia. Because even if they won't admit it publicly, it is in the United States' national interest to see rival countries like Russia and China in shambles, because this ensures that the United States remains the undisputed world power. Similarly, it is also in the United States and its allies' collective national interest to always protect Israel no matter what against something they call the axis of evil. I know the Iranians will disagree and call it the axis of resistance. Anyways, the axis of evil, the axis of resistance comprises of groups such as Hamas in Gaza, in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen and so forth. These groups collectively have a sole purpose, which is to end Israel. This is why you see countries like Canada, the United States and the United Kingdom always jump in to protect Israel. It is not just because of the history of the Holocaust or because they so love Israel. The truth is that they will do this because it is in their collective national interest to see Iran fail in the Middle East. So from that brief definition of military, we can clearly see that the main purpose of any military is to first defend that country against any external threat, ensure internal security and also support national interests anywhere in the world. But the truth remains that no country's military, regardless of race or color, can effectively carry out this very important responsibility if that country only has 3 military branches like most lowly ranked countries on the scale. But sure enough, most black countries, Nigeria included, still have just 3 military branches, which includes the Army, which focuses on land-based operation, and then there's the Navy, which operates at sea to protect maritime interests, and lastly the Air Force, which manages air-based defenses and operation of a country. And that's it. Okbari, just these 3 branches. And to even make things worse, these branches are usually poorly run and underfunded by the government, making these affected countries to be largely defenseless against external and internal threats. On the other hand, most highly ranked countries on the scale, they ensure that they have at least 3 extra military branches in addition to just the Army, the Navy and the Air Force to give themselves an edge and to ensure that their position as a predator on the global military food chain is being maintained. So these extra 3 military branches include number 1, the Marine. No be Obanjo dey talk here. This one no be the marine spirit. This is actually real physical power. The United States calls theirs the United States Marine Corps. The United Kingdom calls theirs the Royal Marines, while the Russians calls theirs Moskoya Prekota, or the Russian Naval Infantry. Before I go cut my mouth. Anyways, the Marines incorporate elements from both the Army and the Navy, which means that they operate both on land and at sea. The second extra military branch is called the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard closely resembles the Navy because both of them operate in water. But the difference is that unlike the Navy, which has the ability and the freedom to operate in international waters in the defense of a given country, the Coast Guard, on the other hand, usually operates in local or national waters. So now let's talk about the third extra military branch. And for me personally, this is the most interesting and the most fascinating military branch. But for understandable reasons, it has generally been shrouded in lots of secrecy, with many highly ranked countries on the MMM scale refusing to publicly admit it as a military branch. But in 2019, the United States, through President Donald Trump, signed a defense bill worth about $800 billion, thereby officially creating what is now called the Space Force, and also making it the sixth military branch. That same 2019, the French had already created their own Space Force equivalent called the French Space Command. And the next year, being 2020, the Japanese followed by creating the Japan Space Operations Squadron. And the next year, being 2021, the United Kingdom quickly followed suit by creating the UK Space Command. The Indians, they didn't even bother waiting for the United States to lead the way, because a year earlier, which is in 2018, the Indians had already launched their own equivalent. So do you think the Chinese or the Russians will be busy sleeping? No, now, because in 2015, the Russians and the Chinese had already created their own equivalent. The Chinese calls theirs the China Strategic Support Force, while the Russians calls theirs the Russian Aerospace Force, or VKS. I sincerely hope you get the point now, because all these countries are not playing at all, especially when it comes to their national security. They're not just talking about the conventional army, navy, or air force anymore. They've all journeyed into space, into the future. This is why I keep telling my fellow black brothers and sisters that I beg you, for try live that your juju small. If you try live whichever religion you hold so dear in your heart for a moment, and let's try to come together instead and invest properly in our military. Because if not by juju, we will get and plenty for those states where I'm from. But still, the Portuguese and the British came prepared with a more equipped military, and they successfully overpowered our military and ransacked the great Benin Empire. This is not an attack on African religion or any other religion. In fact, I personally consider myself pro-religion, but I still think we as black people generally need to learn to do things in moderation, so we don't end up only prioritizing religion while forgetting the importance and need for a strong military. Let me give some examples to further buttress my point. The ancient Greek, led by King Alexander the Great, he ruled the world with a strong military firstly, but it did not mean that they forgot to pray or even sacrifice to the war god Ares, which is the son of the god Zeus, to grant them victories in their battles. The Roman Empire did the same. They ruled a vast portion of the world with a strong military firstly, but it did not mean that they forgot to pray or even sacrifice to the war god Mars. The Ottoman Empire and the British Empire, at their own respective peak, they ruled a vast portion of the world with strong militaries firstly, but it did not mean that they didn't have Islam and Christianity by their side to aid them in battles. So now is the Americans' turn, and they are currently the undisputed world greatest power, and they also previously copied the playbook from the British, which was a strong military plus Christianity equals world domination. It was that simple, but it seemed like over the years they've gotten bored with the idea, and they are now choosing to change the formula by substituting Christianity with a new religion called atheism and LGBTQ++ multiplied by something new every day. So let's all sit tight and watch and see how this will play out for them on the long run. Anyways, my point is, we as black people cannot be taken seriously or respected globally without a strong military firstly, not voodoo or juju. A strong military, not juju, was the reason Emperor Menelik of Ethiopia was able to defeat the invading Italian military during the Battle of Adwa in 1896, thereby ensuring that today all Ethiopians can proudly say and brag that they are the only African country that was not colonized by the Europeans. And like I said in my previous video, slavery, like many other forms of evil, is largely colorblind. And like many other forms of evil, slavery highlights weakness versus strength, not black versus white. It further exposes the fact that no matter how civilized we claim to be as humans, deep down we are still animals. And like animals, we only tend to react to strength, not color or race. This is why the Bengal tiger from India, the Siberian tiger from Russia, or the jaguar from the Amazon forest, if placed in close proximity with the African lion from Tanzania, will all do well to avoid the fight breaking out, because they are all more than capable of inflicting great bodily harm on each other or even cause death. So it's just not worth it. Why? Well, this is because game recognizes game and predator recognizes predator. And this is why a predator nation like the United States, with about 5,000 nuclear warheads, will employ heavy tactics on their books like negotiations or dialogue to avoid outright confrontation with another predator nation like China, which has about 500 nuclear warheads. Or even worse, Russia, which has about 6,000 nuclear warheads, which is more than what the United States has. But do you think that same United States would ever think twice if there was a need for them to invade a militarily trained nation like Iraq or Afghanistan? In fact, in the case of Afghanistan, the US military was physically there for about 2 decades, and the Afghans were unable to do much in terms of resistance against the might of the US military. And I want you to note that all these countries are all predominantly white countries, so it has absolutely nothing to do with race or color. So now tell me, do you think the US military, if they have any need to invade another militarily trained nation like Nigeria, would have any qualms? The answer is no. Let's just be sincere with ourselves. We're already being invaded in every way possible, because when a country as naturally blessed as Nigeria and many other black African countries choose not to properly invest in their military, or even worse, can't even manufacture their own equipment, so we have to rely and depend on predator nations for our military supply, that's invasion already. When all our military supplies and equipment, like from our warships, our aircraft to armor tanks, even guns and explosives, are all being imported because for some silly reasons we can't manufacture anything, that's invasion, that's self-sabotage. Oh, and mind you, all these predator nations can still decide not to sell military equipment to us if for whatever reason they deem our behavior as bad. So we always need to be at our best behavior like a good little puppy to them to avoid being sanctioned. So you tell me, isn't that invasion? Isn't that modern day slavery? Anyways, let me give this last quick example for the sake of time. In late 2024, when the war between the IDF and intensified, and by the way, IDF simply means Israel Defense Forces, is a terrorist group present in Lebanon. When the war between both sides intensified, the IDF did something through Mossad, which is an equivalent to the CIA in America. Something that only most people can imagine happening in action movie. So what did Mossad do? So what exactly did Mossad do? When Mossad remotely detonated several communication devices like the walkie-talkies and pagers used by thereby causing numerous explosions which unalived many of the group members and also injured many more who had the devices on them. So why am I bringing up this example, you may ask? Well, it turns out that just like the Nigerian military, for example, also did not manufacture their own military equipment, including something as sensitive as communication devices, so they had to heavily rely on importation to get them. And the Israelis, being aware of this huge weakness, decided to capitalize on it by intercepting the supply chain used by to get these devices. And what did they do? They swapped ordinarily harmless walkie-talkies and pagers with Mossad manufactured ones, which was then perfectly fitted with explosives inside, and then they shipped it off to his to use. So when the Israelis noticed that was now intensifying their attacks against them in support of Gaza, they simply just detonated all the now explosive devices, thereby unaliving, injuring and mentally destabilizing. thereby forcing the group to an eventual quick submission in the name of a peace deal. So this is a clear example of what can happen to any country that refuses to consciously invest in their military. This is a clear example of what can happen to any country that refuses to work towards reducing over dependency on other countries for every single military equipment. For obvious reasons, the Nigerian civil conflict of 1967 to 1970 was horrible in every sense, but if we must force ourselves to extract anything positive from it, it would be the fact that the conflict highlighted how creative and industrious Nigerians and humans can be in general when pushed to the wall. The Igbos particularly highlighted this during the conflict as they were able to locally manufacture their own weapons and other military equipment to aid themselves. It further shows that black countries and black people generally can do just as well or even better than any other race with the right willpower and a willing government. So I'll conclude today's video by saying military, like media and money, which collectively make up what I call the MMM scale, is a very important determinant of which country can rightly be considered prey or predator. And countries that fail to improve their military will always be regarded as prey, regardless of race or color, and they always keep looking ripe, fat, juicy and defenseless, which is just perfect for predators to feast on, exploit, oppress, stagnate and even enslave. For far too long, many black nations continuously ranked embarrassingly low on the MMM scale, but fortunately no one country, no one people regardless of color was divinely created to remain prey or predator by default. Fortunately, it's still not late for black people to start growing some teeth, to start growing some claws, to stop being prey. So I'll see you guys in my next video. We'll be talking about the second M, media, which is different from the easy to see hard power of the military. Media, on the other hand, is a very unique force because most times we can't really see the physical effects, and even when we see it, it's usually being fed to us in the form of harmless news or just entertainment through the music and movies we consume daily, when in fact media is a very potent weapon disguised to us in the form of a Trojan horse. Only a handful of people truly consider the media a far more potent force than the military, and I happen to be one of them. So in my next video, I'll be explaining why and how we as black people can protect ourselves from the hidden dangers while also extracting the positive from it. So see you guys in my next video. Vamos!